Hello, my name is Art Pinsoff. So this recording will be my third attempt, I believe, to say some words on the relationship between non-duality or things that are related to that with astrology and things related to that. So, I was talking to a friend earlier about there's something kind of a little annoying. It's one of those things where like you find something you're passionate about, but then like why didn't I latch onto this when I was younger? Why is it all of a sudden I'm so interested in astrology? I mean, I've studied every form of mysticism under the sun, just about, in many different forms, in at depth for long periods of time. But astrology never just drew me in until just last year. I started to study it voraciously from a Western and an Indian perspective, and I still am. And I've been practicing it for the last year with clients and friends, and I have certain systems that are very effective for giving readings, but I'm still learning other systems. I kind of just have this voracious appetite to learn all of it, and it's a lot to learn and a lot to contemplate, once you get the information, because half of astrology learning is not memorizing information. I mean, at least half of it is contemplation of the information, that is out there, basically. And all of that starts with first principle observations of basically scientific observations of what reality appears to be from a relative point of view, and a so-called objective point of view for life on Earth in relationship to the solar system and the stars and all that kind of stuff. So that's astrology. And then what is non-duality? Because I have an astrology YouTube channel, but I have a background in non-duality. For like last year, I was interviewing people and having conversations with people about non-duality. I've had my own experiences through the traditional Indian, I guess lineage isn't the right word, but the tradition of Adi Shankara that leads up to Ramana Maharshi and Ananda Mayuma, and goes all the way back to the Vedas as well and the Upanishads. So, I mean, those are all like kind of deep topics in themselves that I used to talk about exclusively for hours and hours every week in my weekly meetings and my interviews and other things. And that was my practice too. My practice was this questioning of who am I, and to surrender to the unknown and the divine. And these are the two sides of non-duality. Ironically, there's two sides to non-duality because you can't put reality into a non-dual experience or expression or understanding. The closest you can get is yin and yang, which in terms of the path of yoga, that's another way to put it. There's the path of self-inquiry, which is the more mental yang path, and then there's the half path, half/path of the yin energy that is about surrender, devotion, pretty much, and that's more of the heart, or you could say right brain, left brain. There's many different ways to view this, but yeah, and then astrology is that to yin and yang extrapolated out. But why was I never interested in the extrapolated out? I did study five element theory through Hermeticism, which is the basis of a lot of astrology. I studied numerology, which is also the basis of a lot of astrology. I even studied astronomy quite a bit. I took 2 semesters in astronomy in college, and I've just been an amateur, like just watching YouTube videos and studying things on Wikipedia every now and then, about different astronomical things I'm curious about, which has only deepened times like infinity pretty much through astrology. And I've done a lot more research astronomically since I fell in love with astrology. But that's because the two are so related. To be a great astrologer, you have to have a great understanding of astronomy. Otherwise, you could still be a great intuition-based person, or psychic, you could say. But the whole point of astrology is to have signifiers to bounce off of. The point of non-duality is to have no signifiers. So that's what I was always drawn to. Ever since I had my first spiritual teacher and guru who helped take me out of depression when I was much younger, and then I found Scientology, and then that kind of gave me another framework. which was very beautiful at the time, but then which I then kind of was disillusioned by once I left, and had to like figure out my model of reality from scratch. And then I got involved with music very highly. I was just playing a lot of music and touring and booking shows here in Austin, Texas for a couple years, or 2 or 3 years, before I was injured. And then, I have this like health crisis journey since then, which still continues. So that's kind of my whole life story in a nutshell. I mean, outside of just, other jobs I've worked and things I've done with computer programming, the health food world, and other spiritual modalities I've been involved with, like Kriya Yoga and pranic energy healing, and a whole bunch of other stuff, really. But, because, I've relationships have been very important to me. The tantric perspective, the embodied perspective spiritually, as well as, heightened expression of romance and eroticism is something I found very inspiring as well. And yeah, so just a lot of different angles of life. But I was never interested in anything too much as a model like astrology, because astrology just parses things into too many categories, is what I used to think. And I wanted to get down to the core of everything. Like tantric, philosophy and sexuality and romance gets down to the core of what experience is really coming from, this unknowable infinite self. And that's the exact same thing that Advaita Vedanta gets to the core of. And if you listen to someone like the modern non-duality speaker, or I don't even know what he calls himself, radical non-duality people would disagree with that, but Rupert Spira, he talks about self-inquiry, but he also talks about, what does he call it, Shaivism? I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's basically a version of tantric philosophy that is embodied. Kashmir Shaivism, that's what it's called. And yeah, so, and he talks about the Shiva Shakti connection, which takes it back to the Vedas. And the Vedas, from the very beginning of the Vedas, talk about non-duality. And then they talk about different deities that come out of the one deity that's unknowable, essentially. And then from there, you get a bunch of deities. Astrology is a divination system looking at omens that attempts to... It doesn't attempt, it just gives you different markers for the basis to make synchronistic observations and intuitions based on. I mean, there's this idea that, that Isaac Asimov put into his Foundation science fiction book series that is all about, like, if there's a, powerful enough computer, then we can put all the data in and then predict the future, and then to a certain degree. But... and that may or may not be possible, that's a great idea, and that is what technology is going to continue to try to do, because, I mean, that's basically what the mind itself does. It basically anticipates problems, it identifies problems, and then it solves problems, or attempts to solve problems. And the issue from, like, a, let's say, spiritual perspective with that is that problem solving always leads to more problems. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't solve problems, because we should. It just means that, it's the same reason why the phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, which is a much more bleak, cynical take on the same idea. But it's more of a grounding idea that, you create the utopia where you solve all the problems, or you go back in time and kill Hitler, and then somehow that leads to some other problem that's even worse. So we just never know. Like, I just saw this movie that was another time travel movie that was really kind of fun, kind of quirky, comedy, rom-com, called Meet Cute with Pete Davidson. And it kind of had this element where, like, one character said at a certain point, like, that they wouldn't want to go back in time to get rid of their traumas, because then that would also get rid of the things they love about themselves that come out of that. So in that way, everything is intertwined, like the supposedly good and bad, And then the spiritual perspective from a non-dual place is that everything is perfect, and that everything is divine, and everything that appears to be any which way, good, bad, short, long, tall, skinny, or whatever, like, everything that appears a certain way is just a temporary perception, because the Vedic perspective is only that which does not change is real, and everything else is a passing illusion, a mirage, which in terms of actual physical observation, it is. it's only, but it's like a dream mirage that can last for 80 years or whatever, a human lifetime. And so, it appears that I have this body until, one day I don't, this body doesn't wake up, and then there's no one for it to appear to anymore, so, there's the material. So basically, breaking things down into components and into different signifiers to explain the complexity of life is not something I've been as interested in as getting to the core of life until recently, because I spent so much time getting to the core of life, and eventually I just experienced the kind of transcendental enjoyment that comes with that, and the clarity of everything, basically, and then there's still the traumas of the body and the mind, and the healing of different things that can still be there, that needs to happen if it feels like it does. There's a desire for that to happen, because as the modern non-dual speaker, Paul Hederman says, like, this is spirituality and awakening is really about traveling lighter. So if it feels like you're going to travel lighter, if you know try to heal the body or heal the mind of old traumatic wounds, then that's the thing you're going to do. If it feels lighter to kind of ignore all that stuff and never see a therapist and just, sit by a lake, if that you're able to do that and you don't have to work and you don't have physical problems, then maybe you'll just do that the rest of your life. Maybe I've met a lot of retired, 60, 70-year-olds who that's pretty much what they do. They find non-duality and they don't have any interest in anything else, and they just relax. They'll just do their regular thing, whatever that is. Maybe they'll paint, maybe they'll make music, maybe they'll read, maybe they won't, maybe they'll just sit and do nothing, because the nature of reality is so happy and blissful. When you come to that place, I don't blame them, but I think there's many different factors that go into this. And even someone like Ramana Maharshi, who was drawn to be alone and just sit basically most of his life, obviously there's a reason why he wanted to do that. It felt very pleasurable for him to do that, and he was drawn to do that. Otherwise he wouldn't have done it. He wouldn't have done it if it was just unpleasant. But then when I did my video on looking at Ramana Maharshi's chart, I could see all these personality factors that he would say, if I'm accurate in my reading of him, that would just be the prarabdha karma, or the thing that's just kind of scheduled to happen in that lifetime. It's not significant in itself beyond just, I don't know. I guess the point is, like, things just happen the way that they're happening, like in a sort of deterministic way. And he said that the only choice you have is whether you identify with what's happening or not. Now, the astrological Indian Vedic texts say something slightly differently, because they actually say that a certain percentage is free will and you can change your destiny. I mean, you could say, if you zoom out another step, is that destined or not? Like, so it becomes like a turtles all the way down sort of intellectual thing to analyze, and it's not really worth analyzing in my view. But what is interesting about astrology to me now is that, I just appreciate the colors of life more than I ever have, and the different perspectives, the different realities, the different flavors, the different elements and energies. Whereas before, I think there was some kind of thing that needed to unravel in myself, in my own mind. And then once that unraveled to the point that there was nothing else to unravel, in some sense, in a spiritual sense, astrology is kind of the only place to go. That's not true, because I could, learn to garden. I could, do a million different things. I could just focus on music. But it's the thing that I've been drawn to do and been inspired to do, basically. And the thing that inspires me is the different perspectives on it. It gives me a unique perspective on Western and Vedic astrology, I've discovered over the past few months, especially because I've come to I haven't come to an end point yet, but I've come to another level of my understanding of astrology and of the different perspectives and lineages and schools and styles of astrology. And now that I can see more clearly the different flavors that different people are applying or using or educated through or whatever, it just shows me, wow, I have my own perspective on this that other people don't have, which is a lot of fun. And there's some people I resonate with more than others, which is also really fun to realize, because it's fun to kind of learn from and speak with people you resonate with. It's also fun for me to talk to people I don't resonate with to some degree, and people who I could at least learn, oh, someone looks at it this way and I look at it that way. That's kind of interesting. And maybe and then maybe I ask why we look at it differently, maybe I don't. Because at the end of the day, astrology is just looking at different things and then extrapolating from those things something else you want to know about. Terence McKenna once said that, in the future we'll probably have like such an understanding of quantum physics that we'll have a quantumology. And at that point, I mean, basically it all becomes what Carl Jung described as synchronicity, basically. And synchronicity just means things that indicate other things, or things that coincide with other things, in a way that he didn't attempt to explain why that would be the case. He just says it appears to be the case, and it does appear to be the case, especially with regard to how much you're really awakening to the moment, or following your dharma or soul's path, or the moment, the thing that, or what I guess the channeled entity Bashar calls his advice to humans, this alien entity from the future being channeled through this dude. Purportedly, he calls it following your highest excitement, and I love the way that he puts that. Bentinho got that from him, and has made it more popular idea in some circles. And of course, there's also Joseph Campbell said, the advice in the 60s to follow your bliss. So it's essentially the same thing. But to follow your highest excitement is really all that any of us need to do, to the extent that we feel like we can practically do that. And if you can't practically do that, then what can you practically do to try to get to a place where you can? Whether that's going to therapy, or finding a different job or career path, or place to live with a more supportive environment, or changing partnerships. It's all, and this comes back to the Paul Hennerman non-dual idea of traveling lighter. What's the way to travel lighter? Because the highest excitement is just a very light way to be. If you go very high into the atmosphere, you're going to feel a lot lighter. I mean, you leave the atmosphere and go to outer space, and you're literally weightless, because gravity. So traveling lighter could mean many things, if we look at it. And essentially astrology is symbolic and an analogy-based, like thinking and observation. And the origins of astrology in Western astrology terms are these Babylonian systems that were called omens. There were no signs or houses or things like these. There were no systems of astrology. If you go back far enough, there were just these omens of, if you see like a black crow on the same day that this star is in this part of the sky, then that means your enemies will be smote if you're the king, or that your nation will have famine. They were pretty much all centered around for kings, because they were the only ones that kind of had access, or would have. They were probably for common people too, but because it was so hard to write books back then and have them, there was no printing press, of course. So essentially, the only recordings that we have on stone tablets or whatever that go back the furthest are related to royalty, I believe. And they're just these omens that this and this happens, on this time of the year, and keep a lookout for this and that. So these were just synchronicities that were recorded. And then as time went on, more intricate systems were created. And then you have things like, the playing cards, the tarot cards. You go back to ancient China and you have the I Ching, which is a book that may be as old or even older than the Rig Veda, which is the oldest of the Indian texts known as the Veda. Veda meaning knowledge or truth or something like this. And so, or wisdom. So basically, you could go after the deepest truth of reality, and astrology itself will even take you to that. All things take you to that. And you could call that non-duality, or Advaita Vedanta, or Zen Buddhism, or God, or love, or the universe, or nothing, or everything. I mean, all these terms are or just self, or you, or surrender. All these terms are essentially pointing to the same thing. And yet the way that they are conceived of and experienced are unique to each individual and to each system in its apparent path to apparently get somewhere, although at the end you realize you never left, kind of thing. And everything you learn, you're just remembering in some kind of sense. You know, all these kind of like wise Zen koan or koan like pointers essentially are all pointing to the same thing, which is so simple once you feel it and see it and hear it. And then where do you go from there? And so I'm just interested in astrology and also music and other things and films, and I just want to combine my interests. I want to help people in any way that I can with my own intuitive abilities, which are significant, and but only really helpful to people who resonate with my energy or whatever, my wavelength. It's not something that I can impose or would want to, you know. So if what I'm saying resonates for you and you come from any of these backgrounds I come from, maybe I would resonate for you more than someone else. Whereas there's so many different flavors of astrology based on personality type and, you know, human life experiences and, you know, just like interests in general and age and gender, you know, yin yang gendered energy and, you know, like, whereas I consider myself like a kind of mixed energy of yin and yang energy, slightly more yin, slightly more yang at times. But, you know, I've noticed friends of mine who are more extreme yin or extreme yang are drawn to people who are more extreme yin and yang. And, you know, I'm friends with them, but those are the friends that I sort of relate to less on a personal level, and then there's something to learn from them, and maybe they learn something when they talk to me, but ultimately we're drawn to who we're drawn to and what we're drawn to at different times, and that's perfectly fine. Like, just being your own unique expression of this infinite and following your highest excitement is what it's all about. And there's a lot of ways that I'm going to explain that in the context and model of astrology on this channel, but ultimately that just is what it is, and it could be expressed in infinite number of ways with or without astrology, and nothing has to be explained. It just is. So yeah, thank you for listening.